Good to go.
Great. Welcome back to Senate Education. Sorry, Representative Brady, our schedule is a little bit behind and we moved a little bit out of order, but we're glad you're here to talk about H486, an act relating to school construction. We did have a walkthrough with Mike O'Grady, but anything you can give us in terms of background, anything you think we should know, the genesis of the bill, all that.
Yeah. Please, you got all the great testimony on universal school meals. But
Yes, we did.
yes, onto this one. I was able to catch most of O'Grady's testimony, so I'll try not to repeat anything. Obviously, your committee's pretty familiar with the construct of the task force and why we're doing it in the whole first part of the bill. So I'll speak to the bill as an entirety and then maybe answer questions about section 2. But
Actually, if you could, just with that first section, you did add 2 members, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you just say something about that?
That was an ad from our Ways and Means Committee. I think their feeling was that this is going to be some heavy lifting work if we're talking about construction, facilities, transformation, what buildings, how many, where. Some of those decisions can get political to a degree, and so is the legislature represented enough on the task force given the gravity of what that group is going to be tasked with doing? So that came from Ways and Means, and then we supported it.
Any question on section 1? 2 members or anything like that? 2 members from the House, 2 Senate.
Yep, and we didn't get into
Geography. Okay, thank you.
All right. So the whole bill was a committee bill. It came out of our committee, House Education 1011. It went through House Ways and Means 1110 and House Appropriations. I don't have that vote off the top of my head, but it was similar to the other 2. Vermont's the only state in the country that's currently pursuing PCB testing in all schools. And the state thresholds for action levels were adjusted in 2021 and again in 2022, and are lower in some ways than what's set nationally by the EPA. And Vermont's attempting really to build a wide-ranging program from the ground up without a lot of resources or guidance from other jurisdictions having been through this. So we've received extensive testimony in House Education that the uncertainty of testing schedules, which DEC has recently asked to be extended again to push it out to July 2026, the more immediate threat of finding elevated levels that could immediately disrupt classrooms or schools, and the complicated nature of the sort of differing levels of threshold by age when you've got schools that are serving multi-ages, make it really difficult for our schools to plan and operate effectively. And our committee felt schools cannot afford another interruption to their learning. Students can't afford another interruption to their learning given the moment in time we're in related to the pandemic, and the risk of closing classrooms and schools is really untenable. So by pausing PCB testing so that it can happen in conjunction, so any planning around PCBs or other toxins, there may be other environmental issues we really want to understand better in our schools, can happen on the same timeline as the school construction and task force work, and then ultimately within the same program instead of operating as separate programs. I think we also got quite a bit of testimony that having this current program partially, run by ANR in conjunction with Department of Health and Agency of Education has some real challenges, and folks on the ground who are actually going through it are certainly experiencing some of those challenges. So again, the design here is that the whole bill goes together, parts 1 and 2, so that we're doing all of this work in a coherent way. We're making funding decisions in a coherent way, and we are disrupting schools and kids as little as possible. So
I'm going
to go backwards a step. In this committee, we wrestled with a bit the EPA versus the Vermont standards for PCB testing or exposure levels. How did your committee deal with that question?
We're policymakers, not scientists, so I don't think that we can speak to action levels. But I think it's concerning that we have first of all that our action levels have moved several times, and the action levels that really put Burlington in a pretty difficult spot have since changed, and now they've changed again in 2021, again in 2022. It feels challenging to be making such large decisions about funding and potentially about disrupting schools, some of which has already happened, much more than Burlington, absolutely, but other schools as well, which I can get into. That's we're in a kind of uncertain landscape around it to be making such big decisions for schools and potentially spending so much money in doing that. So to us that, the discrepancies, I think, lead to why all of this should be folded into work that the school construction task force, which by design, has health experts, has the Industrial Hygiene Association, has sort of all the stakeholders together figuring out, all right, well, how do we test? Where do we test? What are we testing for? When do you remediate? When do you start over? Makes more sense and is going to probably be far more cost effective in the long run.
Do you believe this is a follow?
Please.
So
Yeah.
it's not a follow. So do you believe that the task force will feel empowered to at least evaluate that question between EPA standards and Vermont standards?
Yeah, I think it's part of certainly what they have to wrestle with, and hopefully also wrestle with just toxins and environmental hazards writ large too, and how we're going to deal with that. I remember hearing last year from the former commissioner of DEC, the challenge here that we as a society are playing is whack-a-mole with chemicals, and we live in a chemical-laden world, and so we see these sort of, it becomes, this one is the focal point and big lawsuits and money, and but I think the consumers are always going to be behind the large chemical companies that the stuff is already out there. So we certainly hope, the education committee hopes, we're taking a holistic look at health and safety in schools, not a single toxin or a single issue.
So when we heard from, did you hear from Commissioner Levine as well?
We did not hear from Levine this year. No, we had Department of Environmental Conservation and quite a few different school districts, superintendents. I can get into who, but yeah.
I think for me at least, when the chief health officer says, don't postpone, keep going.
Yeah. How
do we counter that? He's the person that's seen us through COVID. He's our chief health officer for the state of Vermont. We all have a trust in Dr. Levine. So what does House Ed feel like? What do you say to that if somebody asks you why is House Ed going with saying, no, we're going to kind of counter his opinion?
I think, House Ed is saying we have to deal with sort of the reality that we're in, which is that testing has been delayed. They're behind schedule where they were supposed to be. It's expensive. We're going to need to, we've appropriated $4.5 million for it, but DEC told us in January it's going to cost at least $8 million just for the testing. That's before we do any remediation. And this task force, part one of the bill is moving quickly, and is really trying to set up a robust school facilities program for this state, something that we haven't had, not just a categorical grant, but an actual, strategic program about how do we invest in our facilities, what are the priorities. And so it seems, it just seems really natural that the two should be happening together. And again, this task force is set up to work quickly because we're going to get all this great information from the assessment and the inventory that's coming back on facilities by the fall, and we'll be able to act on that. So it seems like those two timelines can actually work together quite well.
So one question I have, we know how long the time frame, how long the pause would last between now and the fall? Is that?
So it would be, any testing that's already started would continue, and that has happened. I mean, just over the weekend, I think there were some elevated action levels at a school, I want to say in Wilmington. It's disruptive. It's, closing parts of a school. It's administrators who are every day, they don't have substitutes. They don't have aides in classrooms. We've got a lot of kids on special ed that don't have the aides this year. And then they, are getting weekend calls about having to close parts of their school. I think it's disruptive and it's demoralizing for schools. So the pause would simply be, in part one of the bill, it's putting the task force in charge of kind of deciding the path forward on what we're going to do in terms of toxins writ large, PCBs included. How are we going to test for them, remediate, what is our plan going forward with a few more stakeholders at the table to decide that.
So that kind of answers my second question, because what I had asked earlier was, in some circumstances, why would we do testing if a building in several months is going to be demolished to construct a new building? So that's the thing that I'm trying to figure out here. So
I think we had testimony from I have to go back to my list, but actually might have been some research students at Dartmouth about a school, I think it's in Massachusetts, where that sort of exact scenario played out, and, you know, a
I
lot
think in
of,
Worcester, yeah.
yeah, a lot of remediation and eventually a lot of money, and the building was eventually just demolished.
Cartilage Council, correct me if I misunderstood this, said that it's really not a pause, that the only thing that we still have to have is the committee that would come back and let us recommend whether or not we move forward.
Right.
So it's not really a pause, it's a, let the study committee come back and report. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah,
So there's no, it's not like pause to me says, okay, it's gonna pick up in 6 months. There's not a restart date.
the restart is, you know, specifically what includes, the powers and duties of the task force include what the appropriate state action level response to PCB
Yep.
contamination is, and whether the state should continue to require testing of indoor air in schools for PCBs.
So it's not a
Yeah,
pause.
yeah.
I just wanna make sure that because I mean, we would be stopping until the legislature picks it up again.
Potentially.
Senator Williams and Senator Weeks.
Well, I think that just answers my question, because, you know, as a parent or a grandparent, if they were gonna pause it, I'd kind of like to know, because everybody knows that we're testing. And as long as they're gonna continue with that, testing.
Yeah, you know, yeah, I think one of the things that we've heard is a real challenge from superintendents is just even how to communicate, you know, the levels of risk, the fact that in some cases, you know, based on where the age thresholds are, some kids can be in the gym and some kids can't. You know, it gets very difficult to actualize and very difficult to communicate. And again, it's, you know, we're operating very much in the post or post-ish pandemic world where, you know, schools have been tremendously disrupted and kids have been out of school, and we're seeing, you know, huge mental health impact in our schools. And it's, I think, you know, we're concerned about sort of the whole student and you know, what are the implications for students in all ways and their mental health as well.
Just to follow up, did you get any testimony from parents or any emails that we're concerned about?
And the NEA was not in, that is accurate, right? You didn't take
I don't
testimony.
think the NEA was in, you know, we've been busy,
No, I
so
understand.
they've been in the
I
room a lot, but I do not
They
think
didn't
they were.
testify on this.
No, they did not testify specifically.
I mean, in the
on
hallway, we'll
this.
let them come in and said that
Yeah.
they were not in favor of the pause, but we will have that in officially.
Sure, yeah, we did have quite a few superintendents.
Senator Williams, Senator Weeks.
All things being equal,
Yeah.
how long do you think a pause might be in effect, given the kind of the timeline
Yeah.
and notional activities, which
I love the way you guys ask questions in a way like as if I have so much more power than I actually do. Because it really, you know, that's up to the task force. We're just trying to sort of set out I didn't mean that to be glib, but it's you know, I wish I could answer some of these questions that are designed to be answered by, you know, folks who are
I mean, you funded
experts
the
in it.
committee or the task force for
Yep.
so long, you kind of,
Yep.
you have a sense of
Yeah.
how government works.
Yeah, yeah.
A
I mean,
year, 2 years.
You know, hopefully the whole plan here, you know, from both of our committees is that this task force, I don't like task forces, but this is a different one. This task force, you know, is going to do expeditious work. I think it's really hopeful that it involves the auditor's office. I think it gives us a new way to consider our spending decisions. But they're going to do this work because we have already started 2 years ago in Act 72. We put a lot into motion around school construction, and we've already spent money and a lot of time in the field to go out and assess all of our buildings and get a really clear understanding of just what kind of condition they're in. And we will have all that information back this fall. This would put that task force in place to act on it so that it's not up to all of us as legislators to have read it, come in ready in January, admitting I haven't read every task force report, you know, that we've ever asked for. So then we come back in January and we've got this report about, okay, here's, you know, here are the recommendations of how you move forward on facilities in this state. Are you setting up an entity like we heard about in Rhode Island and several other New England states where it's its own kind of quasi-governmental agency that's delivering it? What's the funding mechanism? What's happening in terms of bonding? And what are the, you know, strategic priorities that we as a state are investing in when we do facilities work? None of it precludes, of course, local schools and, you know, towns from making other decisions, but we've had a moratorium on any statewide support since 2007, and we see that has a disparate effect. Some
Yeah.
towns can afford, have the political will and or the, tax base for investments, and other communities do not. And so this at least brings us back into doing facilities work on a statewide level. So, I sure hope we are, next spring, we are ready to stand up whatever this new program will be around school construction and facilities. And,
Senator Shane.
Sorry if you mentioned this and I missed
Yeah.
it, but yeah, I know that some schools have voiced frustration with the process. Are there any schools that voice support for pausing it until, are there any schools that voice support for pausing this?
Yeah, we heard from superintendents from, the Superintendent Association, the School Board Association, Wyndham Southeast Superintendent, the Champlain Valley Superintendent, the Windsor Central Superintendent, Caledonia Central Superintendent, and I will say he has essentially become de facto that's Cabot and where they have had some issues. He's essentially become kind of a volunteer consultant to other schools when they find action levels, and he's helping them navigate it because he's had to sort of figure this out in many ways for Cabot and for his district. So, we heard from all of them that facilities are absolutely a dire need and priority, and the two have to go together, and that we need to do this work coherently. We need to be considering it at the same time. And, the threat of a Saturday call that you're going to have to close part of your school next week, or you're going to have to move some grade to another place, is really destabilizing to the education system. It's stressed right now. There's no doubt. Yeah.
So all of those superintendents, they do support pausing?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Weeks.
Just an easy.
Yeah.
So on page 6, there's the PCD fund appropriation comments about essentially leftover funds being reverted back to the general education fund.
Yes, there's a lot of money moving here. Yep.
Yeah, so why was there consideration about keeping that money, continue to keep that money set aside for either PCD or for school construction specifically instead of letting it go back into the general?
Let's see, which line, which pot
It's
of money are
like
you on?
14, line 14, line 17, it's page 6, line 14, line 17.
So those are funds remaining from the Agency of Natural Resources. So those are the money that we have already appropriated to ANR for testing. Again, we appropriated 4.5 million. Anything that they haven't used for testing would come back to the education fund specifically for school construction needs. Since I'm looking at a different
Okay,
copy
so
of
that's 14, right?
Bill than you. Although we also heard from ANR, there's not going to be, that it's costing more. So that's hopeful, but there's probably not going to be any money
And
coming
then
back.
there's another section starting line 17. It's 2.5 million
2 point.
non-obligated amount.
So that is sorry, I'm looking at a different version, but I know where you are. So that is the money that would have been set aside for PCBs that this fall the emergency board had to appropriate. And so it is going back to the education fund. I don't know that there was a particular, that may be a change worth considering of making sure that goes specific to school construction.
Curious,
That's
if
a good-
that's like purposely out of
No,
conversation.
that's a good question, a good catch. I don't think that was necessarily intended to be considered any differently. And it may have changed today as of a few weeks ago. I think some schools have essentially invoiced or sought out some of that reimbursement. But as of a couple weeks ago, no school had actually gotten any money yet from that. So just sitting. Yeah.
So I asked about the NEA, any individual teachers?
Yeah.
Did you hear from?
Individual teachers, no.
So no teachers, no staff, no personnel, no parents, okay.
No.
Senator Gill.
I fall into all of those categories.
Well, I was gonna say, except that I fall into all of
You're in
those
the committee,
categories.
right.
And much of our committee falls into several of those categories, but I fall into all of them, yeah.
I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done on this. I obviously have experienced this firsthand. The latest thing that we're experiencing in our makeshift high schools that we're shaking like an earthquake as they do the big dig next door. That may or may not be relevant at this point, but I did just want to bring up, for me, where I've struggled is the fact that threshold number has shifted, and I don't want to use the word arbitrary, because I'm sure it is not arbitrary, but it was just odd for me living under, that 15 parts per billion threshold and then having it change and wondering if it's going to change again. And I mean, so that to me is problematic. And the second thing for me that is problematic is that we know that these chemicals are harmful. There are thousands of chemicals that are harmful. Apparently there are 7,000 chemicals in a cigarette. So there's that. When I dig a little bit into the science behind this, other than the words that are very triggering, cancer, endocrine, reproductive, I mean, those are very serious and scary diseases. But when I dig into the science, what I keep seeing over and over and over again, and most recently in the National Medical Library paper, PCBs are most harmful when they are ingested in food.
Yeah.
And as we were told by our hygienist that spoke to us remotely, on surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
So, air is, again, everyone here knows I'm not a scientist, but I would love to learn more about the difference between food and surface exposure versus air exposure. That still has not been made clear to me. So I'm just putting that out there. But I hope that we can dig into that more as.
We're gonna hear from the American Academy of Pediatrics that I think will be very helpful on this. Did you hear from them? So, any doctors?
No, we had some research.
So we're gonna
students,
jump
but
in
not
and
others. Yep.
try to understand the science a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, again, everybody has their own vote, but we did hear from the chief medical officer of the state of Vermont, who I think we all have respect for, thinks that this program is up and going and we should continue it. But as you know, anything could happen, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lively debate without a doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
But we also appreciate everything, you guys put into
Yeah.
this, and certainly we all are finding our way to do whatever's best for kids. Nobody's questioning that for sure.
Yeah. And, I think we were also looking at, the testing schedule and the work ahead, which is already behind, and I wasn't aware of this until this session, but we're talking about all schools, so including not just approved independent, recognized, it may even be schools that are not receiving public dollars at all that are swept into this program. And so what does it mean if there are elevated PCBs at a private school that is all private pay students that may be leased from an out-of-state landlord, and now we're going to put state funds into first testing that facility and then maybe remediating that facility out of our education fund and our statewide public education dollars? That
I think that's a fair question.
that's a real concern.
That's a fair question. Absolutely, no question. Any other questions for Representative Brady? It's good testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Hugo.
Okay.
Hango, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
It's totally.
I don't know.
That's the way my days go.
Excuse me, are you here to testify?
Oh, she just came on from House Edge.
Oh, you're on House Ed, okay, all right.
Representative
Oh, okay.
Representative Stone,
Oh,
yes.
great.
Yes.
Representative Hango, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Well, you are welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And we are talking now miscellaneous education bill, and specifically for you, the section on the National Guard. So if you would just say a few words, that would be great.
Great. I have a few paragraphs. Is
Sure,
that
we can handle
okay?
that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. Thank you for inviting me to introduce a very limited expansion of last year's Act 140, which was H 517. The program, as we passed it at the end of 2022, extended the opportunity for a National Guard member to obtain certificates, an additional bachelor's degree, or a master's degree up to the UVM rate of tuition, should they wish to enhance their current skill set. This year's expansion will allow a Guard member to pursue a postgraduate degree program outside of the state of Vermont that is not offered at any Vermont institution, to be reimbursed at the UVM rate of tuition or up to. As an example, There are currently 5 Guard members who are interested in becoming physician assistants, and that degree is not offered within the portfolio of programs at any Vermont institution of higher education. During recent discussion with officials at UVM and the Larner College of Medicine, I learned that the barriers to setting up a PA program, PA studies program, are vast. Not only would the number of highly technical lab spaces being utilized for nursing and med students need to be expanded, but there is also a shortage of PAs and doctors who would be able to be available as educators and preceptors for the 2 to 2.5 year long program of classroom learning and clinical rotations that a PA completes in various specialties. For these reasons, Vermont does not and likely will not have a physician assistant studies program. This limited expansion to the program will not cause an increase in the military budget. The baseline budget proposal has room to accommodate the limited requests that the Guard will likely state, and they do not anticipate having any additional funding to be required to offer this benefit. I'd like to thank the Guard for bringing this request forward. They are now in their 4th full year of the benefit program, and they continue to present opportunities to enhance the program to maximize its benefits to the members of the Vermont National Guard. Offering these adjustments to the program make members stronger in their military positions, to their employers, and better contributors to their communities. In this example, assisting members with the cost to become a physician assistant, for example, will enhance their individual education and employment opportunities and will fill a gap in both the Vermont National Guard and in the healthcare workforce of Vermont. I would also like to thank House Education for their work to include this small expansion in their miscellaneous education bill. Thank you for taking the time to consider this.
Thank you. Thank you. You have, without a doubt, we have worked closely together, you and former versions of Senate Ed, on a number of military-related issues, so appreciate your thoughts on this and your work. Questions or comments for Representative Hancock? Yes, Senator Buell.
Thank you very much. And thanks for doing the research and looking into what it would take to have a PA program in Vermont. I mean, that's just really helpful. It's also super disappointing. It just seems like it would be so useful for our state as a whole. But I really appreciate you doing that check. And I just want to say that this seems like a great opportunity, and I support it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anything else for Representative Hancock? Thanks for coming down.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
see you.
It's always a pleasure to see all of you.
Yeah.
Don't see enough of you, but we're very busy these days.
I know.
We are.
Take
All
care.
right, thanks a million.
Bye.
Stay in touch. Ms. Garces, hello.
Hi.
So good to have you back in Senate Education.
Well, good to have me back.
And Ms. Garces, you are here also on H461. Is there a specific section?
Yes, I am here on the section on the ethnic studies.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Working group. And I do have some support that I need from you all.
Okay.
So just to give you a background and for the record, Amanda Garces, Director of Policy Education Outreach for the Human Rights Commission and the chair of the ACTON Working Group. So last year we rectified the statute to extend us until June 2023, but we did not change the date. The appropriation was included. We also had an appropriation for our consultant that we just hired in January. So all of our work will be done in June of this year. So this is just to extend that legally in the statute. However, today I have a request because so we submitted the education quality standards to the state board a year ago. On April 13 will be 1 full year. We're still working on it, and right now there's just a lot of commotion around these independent schools. For the past 6 months, my co-chair Mark Page and I have been submitting document after document after document about all of, talking about like 35 pages of documents we had to produce to explain every single thing that we have done. Which is, we have done it with our hearts, and it has been a really great collaboration with the EQS subcommittee. But I am worried that when we finish in June, there's gonna be no more working group. And if there's questions about all the work that we have done with this framework, that there's nobody to go back to. So today, what I'm recommending is a creation of what I call a technical advisory working group, which is 11 members out of the 23 who are not paid
Okay,
a stipend, so there will be no appropriations, so this will just be all the V's.
Yeah.
Plus Susanna's office, the Office of Racial Equity,
Okay.
and my office, to just advise on 3 things. If there are questions around the EQS, if there are questions around our proposed framework that we're developing now, and if there are questions about the policy recommendations we're making to the legislature. And this will be in existence from July 1st, 2023 to January 31st, 2024. That
Okay.
gives us that first month of the legislature to come and report on whatever report we come up with in June. And that will be it. So there will be no appropriations. It will be just like a technical team. I spoke with every single working group member in the past 2 days. I had confirmation from all except from one that I'm still waiting to hear. Hoping your email now. So everybody's on board, and and I will, be committed to consult with the members who have been our community members. And this will not be to create anything new. This will be just like really technical to be, if the state board asks, why did you come up with this word? And then we have to produce something. I really don't want to be responsible by myself. Or my office, and I think we need to have that as an accountability mechanism to the community who has given us all their expertise.
so right now, Ms. Garces, the board is dissolved immediately upon the report, is that what happens? Because sometimes what we do is we then might dissolve the board, keep you all going for another like 6 or 7 months, all of you.
Yeah, but that will mean a lot of coordination. That will mean that
Yeah.
we will have to put appropriations for the
Right.
stipends for the community members.
Not a lot, I mean, if it
No.
were to make sense,
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's,
If
I
it
would think it would be minimal if
Yeah.
it made sense to keep everybody going, but you're saying the technical advisory group would be just fine, and to keep that up and going until 2024.
Yeah, I would have to go back and ask them, it's
Okay.
like, where, as the chair, it's hard to coordinate. And I don't envision a lot of meeting time. So yes, we could keep them if you wanna put appropriation. And I'll have to ask them, do you wanna stay on for another 6 months?
Sure.
Some people had, and the other
But
thing is that,
it wouldn't be like you'd have to be meeting anyhow, you're really there
Exactly.
just in case
exactly,
you'd have to meet to answer some questions.
exactly, and we wanna make sure that we do.
Yeah,
Is there an appropriation involved in this at all?
No, not in the technical, no,
only in my
Only-
version,
only
if I
if-
were,
yeah.
if we were to do it that way, yeah.
correct.
Thank you.
Which is why the reason I was like, is this gonna be a problem for appropriation, rather have a smaller community?
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And if that makes sense and that's done okay, then I think everyone would just as soon save probably $500. I mean, it's probably what
Yeah.
it's gonna be.
yeah,
But yes, Senator Sheen.
Oh, no,
Okay,
just,
I thought you were turning.
I'm just looking around, taking in the scenery.
So how do you want to leave it with us? Do you want to stick with the technical advisory group? We'll advise Ledge Council to keep going, the technical advisory group until, when in 2024?
January 31st, that would give us enough time if we have recommendations for you all, and, because we will have recommendations to legislature around policy changes, statutes, and bills. That will be aligned with all the work that we came up. That's part of our work right now.
Kind of lost track.
Yeah,
Yeah, so isn't the whole idea is to provide the recommendations, we're just changing the date? I mean, I'm not- I understand why the board might want to, stay in existence, but
so because we have done we submitted our recommendations for the education quality standards to the state board in April 2023. No, April 2022.
Yeah.
And we've had to do so much back and forth work with them to tell them where we came from, that it needs to have a place to go back to. Because what happens is like if they had changed all of our recommendations without knowing, we had so much work that we did with community to get feedback to have the document that we have right now, that if they were to change it without knowing the history of it, it would have been like the same document without our recommendations. So it just kind of really helps to have an accountability mechanism so that they'll work. And you invested $50,000 for this consultant. I don't wanna see that work lost either.
Is there anything that would preclude you, if questions came up as this work is being kind of following up on 7 weeks, being implemented, from just calling together 3 or 4 people to say, hey, because really what you're looking for is kind of some, not people that come in, you would represent the group.
I don't think that it's in the values of the work, of the creation of this working group, the way that it has set up. I think the
Trust
value is that we trust the community and that the community has trusted this process.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the one person speaking for a community that has given so much to this work. So, no, I think I need a team of people that can then be held accountable for pushing something that is not in value with what we have done. So, of course, I will be here testifying as Human Rights Commission, but
Absolutely.
not on behalf of the working group.
How's that feel to everyone? We'll have Ms. St. James draft that. And we might have you work directly with that St. James just to make sure. You have her.
I
email
have
address?
drafted something so I can send to her.
Could you send that to her and
Yeah.
copy me?
Yeah.
And Kate, and that would be great. And then we can just make sure it's all good.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everything you've done. And our final witness is Ms. Kruger. Ms. Kruger is here. Rosie Kruger is the Director of Child Nutrition Programs, at the Agency of Education. And we're returning to school food programs and universal school meals. Welcome to Senate Education, back to Senate Education. You were with us quite a bit last year and even earlier this year. So we have had a walkthrough of H-165, both with Ledge Council and the member of the Agriculture Committee. We know that House Ed, and I suspect that Probst actually had possession of it, and maybe Finance, so it's made its way through a bunch of committees. Do you have prepared testimony, Ms. Kruger, or are you here more for just questions?
Yeah, so for the record, Rosie Kruger, State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. Our goal is to make sure that whatever you all choose to pass and whatever policy decisions you choose to make, that what comes out of this committee and the legislature is actually implementable. And so we worked very closely with House Agriculture Committee to provide feedback on how universal meals was working this year, how Act 151, which was passed last year, how that played out in real life. And there were several areas where we needed some clarification from the legislature about what your intent was, and some other areas where, yeah, as we got into it, we realized, oh, we need some guidance or we need some legislative language that specifically gives us the authority to do this. So we provided all that feedback to House Agriculture, and they incorporated all of that into the bill. So all the places where we specifically asked for language, they incorporated that. And where we asked them to make a policy decision one way or another, they did that. And I can point out to you those policy decisions that they made where things are a little bit different from what we've been doing this year. But in general, the bill as it's before you is implementable, and it's up to you all to decide if that's what you want to do with state resources. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have about it, based on the testimony you've heard already. I was here for some of the testimony earlier, and so I took some notes about questions that you had that I can answer. So I'm happy to jump in on those or answer any specific questions about the bill.
if you heard something that you can answer,
Sure.
that'd be great, and we'll move to Senator Weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a question about schools that were previously not participating. So one of the things that Act 151 did was it eliminated an exemption process for schools to go through if they did not want to participate in the National School Lunch Program. And previously, we did have 2 schools in the state that weren't participating, Marion Cross Elementary in Norwich and Wyndham Elementary. Both of those schools did not have, full kitchens on site where they felt like they could prepare a meal, and so that was their rationale for not participating. We, had approached those schools previously because there is, of course, a way for the schools to offer a meals program even if they don't have a kitchen, and we have many schools in the state that do that. They satellite in meals from another location, but until the schools were required to participate, they really weren't interested in having those further conversations with us about what they could do. So we have worked with those schools. They are offering school meals programs this year. They are using universal meals, and we feel that we can continue to work with them, and there is a path forward for those schools. But so that's the situation. There are no public schools this year that are not offering school meals or not offering universal school meals. There was a question about sending food home and food waste. So in general, it depends on where the food is quote unquote wasted. So if the food is still in the kitchen, it's still a property of the school meals program, and it can be donated to a 501c3 nonprofit. It cannot be just given out to individuals because it still belongs to the National School Lunch Program and the nonprofit school food service account. And these are federal programs. There are very strict requirements on what you can do with the resources in those programs. In general, if the food's still in the kitchen, the food service program is going to figure out how to reuse that food. They're very thrifty, and so it may be incorporated into the following days offering. A lot of schools do offer yesterday's meal as a second choice for today's offering. Or they, figure out how to make a soup with it or that sort of thing. But if there is an extra meal, if there's extra milk left over before the start of school vacation, that sort of thing, the schools can donate the items to a local food pantry that's a 501c3 nonprofit, and we provide guidance on how to do that, and we do see that happen. If the food has passed the point of sale, so it's gone out on the tray with the kid, then it's been paid for by the government. And so at that point, those restrictions are no longer in place. Most schools in Vermont have a share table. And so if a child has to take an item as to meet the federal requirements of what's a reimbursable meal and they choose not to eat that item, they don't want it, they can put it on the share table. As long as it's a individually packaged item, so milks, pre-packaged items. They can also, if there are fruits and vegetables that are, have a peel like an orange or a banana, that sort of thing. All of those things can go on the apple. Apples are a little bit trickier if they've been served with tongs, and usually what would happen with those is they would go, they may go to the share table, but then they would get sanitized before being reserved. So the share table provides kids an opportunity to take more if they're still hungry, which is great and reduces waste. What happens to the food that's left on the share table afterwards? There's a couple of opportunities. It can get donated. It can get reincorporated into the meals program as long as it's, again, sanitized, et cetera. And we provide guidance on all of that to schools. In general, food does not get sent home from the school meals program in backpacks because of the federal requirements on the programs. And so all the federal child nutrition programs require a congregate meal requirement. So the students have to eat the meal in a congregate setting together, and that's just how the federal programs work.
We did hear, though, as I recall, from some school lunch folks earlier this year that sometimes it happens.
So
I mean, it's not as though.
yeah, so the food from the share table
Yeah.
theoretically could
Yeah.
be used that way, and then there are backpack programs. They're just not funded with the federal funds. And so the Vermont Food Bank operates a backpack program in a number of schools, and then some other nonprofits here in Montpelier, the Rotary does one. So that happens for sure. It's just not coming through through the state or federal funding.
Got
So that was that question. Sorry, I hate-
Senator Reed, you want to jump in?
No, no, I'll let her, she's got a, it's pretty well
Answer.
organized.
I did want to make one change. You heard, or one correction. You heard from Rep. Cole that the CEP rule change has officially happened. Actually, the USDA has proposed making a rule change to CEP that would be very beneficial for Vermont, but that hasn't been finalized. That's open for comment right now, and it's open for comment until May 8th. And so that rule change would reduce the threshold for schools to participate in the community eligibility provision and receive the multiplier for that. It's kind of in the weeds, but it's a good thing for Vermont.
So I know that in ag, we're going to likely send a letter, so maybe this committee could also
yeah.
sign on to that. We'll just.
And the Agency of Education is planning to submit a comment supporting that rule change because
Great.
it would be very good for Vermont in general. Yeah, so the community eligibility provision, it's one of the 2 federal options for offering universal meals that we're using to draw down the most federal funds possible. And it's the more advantageous option. And so right now, in order for a school to participate in CEP, at least 40% of their students need to be directly certified for free meals. That's different from being eligible for free and reduced price meals. The direct certification is when we get the information because the household participates in another means tested program such as SNAP or REACH or TANF. And so currently thresholds at 40%, you're going to drop it down to 25%. In CEP, we take the threshold of, or the number of directly certified students, we multiply it by 1.6, and that's the school's free planning percentage. And so if so many more Vermont schools could participate, they would be able to take advantage of that multiplier, we'd be drawing down more federal funds, and it would reduce the state contribution per universal meals.
No, I know the eligibility program. We're just hit with so many acronyms.
I know, yeah. I try to not use too many of them, but we've got a lot. So just wanted to update you on the status of that. It sounds like USDA intends to finalize the rule, but again, they're seeking public comment. And we don't know when it would go into effect. It's most likely no earlier than school year 24-25. There were some questions about stigma, and I can certainly talk more about that, the stigma that we used to see. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around it, so I'm happy to talk about that, but that can kind of be a little bit of a goose walk. So I'll hold that unless you have specific questions. And then there was a question about what happens if the feds change the rules. So right now, all of our state law is written around these federal programs. The National School Lunch Program has been in effect for many, many years. It's a federal program. It's an entitlement program. So it's going to keep happening unless Congress specifically acts to change it. And the way that all of our school meals work is built around this federal program. So it would be, should Congress choose to totally repeal the National School Lunch Program, everything would have to be revisited. It wouldn't just be universal meals. So I think that would be pretty unlikely to happen. Act 165 does include some provisions that require that in order for the schools to get the state funding, they have to participate in the federal provision that draws down the most possible federal funding. And so it mentions CEP in provision 2, which currently are the provisions that draw down the most possible federal funding, but it says, or any other provision, which in the opinion of the agency draws down the most funding. So that is there to give us that flexibility if USDA decided to, or Congress decided to make some changes to the program that made it more advantageous, we'd be able to shift right into that rather than having to come back to you and say, oh, there's this new program, we'd like to require schools to participate in that instead. So I feel pretty confident that it is written in a way that will allow us to be flexible with the federal requirements. At this point, the feds have completely gone back to the old rules. So all the waivers that we had during COVID are gone. And so we're back to the norm at the federal level. And any changes that are being considered are really about expanding the program and increasing the amount of federal funding rather than reducing it.
Good. Right, I get that. My only comment was, we're living in good times. Things change and things do, there are cycles of prosperity and not. I was just curious. I just wanted, what I was trying to force was the statement that we are creating an obligation. And if the federal government decides to retract any of its benefits, we maintain the obligation. That's really the comment I was looking to have someone.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, that's fair.
Senator Hewlett, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, yeah, because I hear your question. It's a good one. You brought it up a few times now. I mean, couldn't you just like add an amendment to the bill if you wanted to that says if the federal government changes, you know what I mean? And could we amend the bill if we felt that that was something that's important?
I wasn't looking to kind of create policy. I was looking to just validate obligation.
No, I think you bring up a point. That's a legitimate point.
I mean, if the state, frankly, if the federal government pulls us back, that means no kid eats. So we really would, I would think, step in because that would become a free and reduced lunch.
Not only would we have to maintain what we
Yeah,
said here,
we
but
would
we
also-
have to make up
And the
that.
hungriest kids would be feds did that.
The way
I
that
don't
the,
think we'd want to.
No, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying you could, if it was a problem, we could change the bill.
But if we change what you want, what you think, not what you want, yeah. If we were to put an amendment that says if the feds pull back money, we then would pull back the program, that would hurt the weakest and poorest kids in
Is
Vermont.
that what you're saying?
No, that's
That's an unintended
an
consequence.
unintended consequence.
Okay.
Gotta look
If you
beyond
want to
the
put that out,
rosy.
No,
no,
I don't. Well, I was
Yeah.
thinking more if the feds pull money back, can we like
We can revisit.
revisit the, yeah.
and then that's what I'm telling you is that if they pulled back, it would change the whole
Everything.
So we
architecture.
would have
Like,
to
you
revisit
would,
it
yeah,
anyway.
you would
Okay.
need to tell us how to do a whole
Gotcha.
bunch of stuff beyond universal meals. So,
If they pull back, you better go there.
right, because if they pull back on this, which, how long has this program been around? 3 years?
1946.
Yeah.
So,
We're a country, something's going on. I
What
think.
was the last World War?
Last World War, yeah, yeah.
Right,
Yes,
right,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
You guys are thinking everything's hunky dory.
Not even remotely, sorry.
so those were the things that I noted that you had questions about, but I'm happy to answer other questions.
Yeah.
Young Miss Brady brought up some statistics. Being an eighth grader, I figured it's, or an 8-year-old or something to that effect. I figured it's just worth kind of getting a sense of one particular statistic that she brought up. So my first question is, do you track actual utilization of the program during this 1 year pilot, not pilot, but universal meal coverage? Okay, so she made 2 comments. One was that before 34% of Vermont students actually received, I'm not sure what the right acronym is, but school meal subsidy or something to that effect, right? That's 34%.
So I think she was a little bit confused about the numbers that we present. So this school year, 34.8%, I think, of our students qualify for free and reduced price meals. That's not a consumption statistic. We have tracked, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull them up for you really quick. We have tracked actual participation. And obviously, we're still in the school year, so we don't have a full year number, but we've been looking at it month by month. And I believe that we've got about 60% of our students overall are participating. I don't have the
Okay,
numbers right in front of
so
me.
for this current year, it's
But,
roughly 60%.
60% participation in lunch. And that's up from when we operate pricing programs, it was lower than that. It's not up as high as we thought it might go up. So when we were kind of providing you guidance in prior years about how much this could cost, what if every student eats? So it's definitely participation is up, but not necessarily everyone eating. And participation is up slightly more among the free and reduced eligible category than the other categories, but it is up across the board.
Good. Okay, so now my real question. the bill seems to be drafted such that the formula for reimbursement is 100%. They take the number of students, But what you just said was, in fact, current utilization is somewhere roughly 60%. It's not 100%. So I'm just wondering if the math is appropriate, if it's in the bill for determining the fiscal note that supports the bill.
So the bill actually reimburses schools based on the number of students who eat. So the universal meal supplement is per reimbursable meal, which is a meal that meets the federal requirements and includes the required components. And so for every meal in the free category, the feds are paying for all of that. And so the state's not contributing anything.
Right.
For the reduced price, the state is contributing 40 cents per lunch and 30 cents per breakfast out of the general fund. And then the remainder is coming from, the feds. And then for the paid category, this is the students who have not submitted an application or are not showing up as directly certified.
No, I'm talking about the bill. The bill is drafted, not what we're doing now.
So the bill as drafted is basically what we're doing now with a couple of technical changes, so we've asked for clarification. So it's the paid student meals that the state is reimbursing, and we're not reimbursing the entire cost to make the meal because the feds actually do subsidize the paid meals. But we're reimbursing the difference between the federal paid reimbursement rate and the federal free reimbursement rate. And that's what we're calling the universal meal supplement. And that is only for every paid meal that is actually served and claimed rather than every student every day, every student attending.
I understood that this was going to be food for every student. Every student was going to have to. And then, because
Not have to eat,
okay.
they're allowed.
Okay,
There's no
because
requirement
I
to
brought up
eat.
the issue about that to get away from the stigma, give everybody a card and have everybody that wants to eat use their card. You said, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, let's talk about a little bit more about stigma because there are some misperceptions because it's changed over the years. And so, many years ago, free and reduced students would get a different colored ticket or they'd have to stand in a different line or there'd be different tokens. None of that is allowed in the programs anymore. That's called overt identification. And so that all of that data has to be kept really private. And so even when the kid goes through the line, there's supposed to be no indication of them being free or reduced price eligible. That's already part of the program regulations. But what happens is that in order for that meal to be reimbursed by the federal government, it has to contain all of those components. Before universal meals, in order to balance their budgets, a lot of schools were offering a la carte items. And so a student could get the reimbursable meal. If they were low income, the meal would be totally paid for by the federal government and the family wouldn't have to pay. If they weren't low income, then the family would have to pay. Or a student could buy one of those a la carte items. So if they just wanted a slice of pizza, they could just take the slice of pizza. But the a la carte items are not reimbursable by the federal government. And so the family would be charged, or the student would have to have money. And so the effect is that the school is having to, the child who qualifies for free and reduced price meals is being required to take the fruit or vegetable and the other items to make it a full reimbursable meal. And the higher income families, the child can just, take the piece of pizza and have that charged or pay cash. And so, that's not overt identification. It's very subtle, but it is something that students notice, and it does have the impact of driving down participation. And that's very hard to, we've done everything we can to legislate against overt identification. Again, those tokens are no longer allowed, that sort of thing. But when you have, some students are relying on that reimbursable meal and then other students have other options. Other students are, ordering takeout or whatever to be delivered to the school. And just the free and reduced eligible students are the ones who are getting the school meal. That really discourages those free and reduced eligible students from getting the meal because they know that other students will notice that. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about stigma. And we do have schools that use cards, that use ID cards, use PIN numbers, that sort of thing. That is in place, and schools are doing that. And that certainly cuts down on the overt identification, but it's.
Are they still gonna be able to use their own system?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, the schools can still use those point of sale systems. Some of them will choose to not do that because under the community eligibility provision, and under the later years of provision 2, they don't actually have to track the individual students who are eating. They just need to track the number of students eating. So they may choose to go to a tally mark system rather than a point of sale system in order to just speed the lineup.
Unrelated to follow-up, food scraps.
Mhm.
Is there any, hopefully we're gonna be getting food from local farmers. Some farmers like food scraps, to feed their chickens or the pigs. Is that prohibited?
No, schools are included in Vermont's universal recycling law, and so they were actually, as the law was phased in, they were included at different size levels, and so all Vermont schools are composting their food scraps. Some in the hierarchy of what you're supposed to do with waste food, animal feed is above composting, and so I think some schools are doing that, but there is, the Agency of Agriculture could really talk to you more about this. There are some restrictions on after food has been eaten or touched people. It needs to be heated before it can be fed to animals. So I don't know how many schools are diverting to specifically for animal food.
When government gets involved.
I think
the chickens
there are
off it.
concerns about trichinosis and, so that's why that's there. Vermont schools have kind of almost led that, kids are learning about composting at school. And we have a lot of really innovative programs doing cool stuff with compost.
Okay, a couple questions. First, back to stigma for just a second. It just seems odd that we couldn't have figured out the stigma issue with the a la carte problem some other way that didn't cost tens of millions of dollars per year. I just fail to see the creativity that you just seem to have missed something there, that we could have found a simpler problem than what we're creating. But that's just a statement. I have a question for you though, because you seem pretty knowledgeable about this whole subject. In the proposed bill, in the H 165, there is a comment about making breakfast available to students in classrooms after the start of the school day. To me, that means that the school day is kicked off. We're not in the dining hall anymore. So are students being served breakfast in the classroom?
Yeah, so that section of the bill, the requirement, the shall, is for schools to do everything possible to increase participation and to make meals, available to students. And offering breakfast in the classroom or breakfast after the bell are two options that schools could use. It's listed as a may. Their recommendations for how to make the meals more available to students, but they're not required to do that. We do have a lot of schools doing that. So they may offer breakfast in the cafeteria before the start of the school day, but they may also offer a kiosk in the hallway where the student can grab a unitized meal and bring it with them to class. And some schools are actually offering meals in the classroom where the meals are distributed in the classroom, at the beginning of the day. We do also have, it's already state practice. I think this incorporates it where time spent eating in the class is considered part of the school day. So it's meant so that school meals are not competing with lesson time, and that there's not a perception that we need to shorten breakfast time when students are eating in the classroom. If they're also learning at the same time, that's considered part of it.
I appreciate that, but certainly going to be looking for the educator's perspective on those aspects to see if it's disruptive or not.
A lot of schools began offering meals in the classroom for the first time during COVID because it was, of course, we couldn't have 100 kids eating together in the cafeteria. And it worked really well in some places and it didn't work in other places. And so we heard a lot of varied feedback, and now the schools have the freedom at this point. If it's not working for them, they go back to feeding in the cafeteria. There's no requirement that they offer meals in the classroom. So it's an option if it works well for the school. And again, they don't have to do it.
Any other questions for our witness? I have a request from, we'll hear from Ms. Richter, a fiscal note. We'll hear from our teachers, principals, superintendents on this. Is there anyone else people would like to hear from on this? As you know, we did take testimony a while ago. We heard from people, I think, in just about everybody's district, but is there anyone else that people would like to hear from, please?
So the day has been full of supportive arguments.
Yeah.
Which I get. It's very helpful. It's very constructive. Excellent testimonies across the board all day long. What we're missing is any contrary arguments. And I'm not saying that, that it would support anything that I feel or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
But we can't just be always like patting ourselves on the back or doing the right thing. We have to hear.
Yeah.
So one group that's
Yeah,
got
please.
concerns with the bill
Yeah.
is independent schools.
Okay.
Because their students the meals for independent schools are only reimbursed for the publicly tuition students. And the Catholic schools in particular have been pretty vocal to the agency that they feel that's unfair. So those would be some folks who would have some ideas about what they don't like about the bill.
I can attest to the fact that people out there don't support free meals for everybody, because I get the emails all the time.
Please.
No, I was about to ask, who should we invite?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know.
Well, maybe when we see, so we've taken a lot of testimony in ag about this over the past few years. Didn't hear a lot of opposition. In fact, I can't think of any real opposition that we heard. And last year in ed, when we started this, I don't recall, but I would, of course, welcome you to give it some thought. I know ag, and sometimes it happens. It seems like this is moving in a direction that some of us would like. We've, the House has passed it over. I know ag is unanimous in its support. They're going to send us a letter outlining why they believe that it's important. They're not going to take the bill in, but it's one of those things that might not be a lot of opposition, but you will get some emails from people, I'm sure. But if there are people in particular that you'd like to hear from, let us know. Yeah, and also the fiscal report might pull in some things that might.
I think the one comment about the independent schools, if they have contention against this being built, let's just hear. I mean, the teacher, gotta hear those.
Anything else?
When you hear from JFO, I just want to let you know that we have worked closely with them on their estimate and we agree with all the assumptions that they're making in their estimate.
Ms. Horton, you happen to be in the room. Is there anything you would like to add at this point?
The face that you're making at me.
Oh, no, it's just my normal.
Just that perhaps you
No,
don't
I'm
want
happy.
to.
Right. Yeah, it's not a,
I have one additional piece of information.
floor is yours.
Oh.
Just introduce yourself and
For the record, Nora Horton, Executive Director from District Vermont. Nice to see you all again. So you have heard this mentioned. Well, I'm not sure if you heard this mentioned today or not from Rosie, but yes, the rule change that has been proposed
the
by
federal level.
USDA
Yep.
to change threshold for the community eligibility provision. So that is proposed. If you heard Vermont Edition on Tuesday, you heard the Undersecretary for the Food and Nutrition Service of USDA on Vermont Edition saying that they fully intend to be implementing this rule after the comment period. So they sound confident about it at any rate. But what that is going to do is it is going to make it possible for more schools in Vermont to use the community eligibility provision to provide universal meals. And that tends to have, for most schools, a more favorable federal reimbursement rate. So we are expecting that over time, the cost for this program should certainly not be increasing and could even decline. But so that you've already heard though. But the other thing that's really exciting about what this will do is that it will make more towns in Vermont and more children in Vermont able to access after-school and summer meal programs that are free to all children ages 0 to 18, universal and fully funded by federal funds. And the reason why it will do this is because those are two different child nutrition programs, an after-school program and a summer meals program. They are also operated by USDA. They have their own rules, and their eligibility requirements are that at least 50% of the children attending the school in whose school attendance area the program is running, the summer program or the after-school program. At least 50% of the kids have to be enrolled in free or reduced price school meals. So that actually excludes many, many of our communities in Vermont, especially our smaller and more rural communities, because they may have 40% low-income kids in their town, but they don't hit 50. But with CEP, if you are using CEP, you're allowed to use a different approach, which I'm not going to go into the weeds on, unless you really beg me, and I don't recommend it. But you're allowed to do a different approach to determine your eligibility for how you hit that 50% mark of students who are considered low income in your communities. And it means that with this lowering of the CEP threshold, and if we are providing state funding through H-165, if you pass it, that will help schools be able to offer universal meals and afford to use CEP. It means that about 79 additional towns, many in some of your counties, I will say.
And you'll let us know that.
I have it for you. I'm going
Thank
to
you.
leave it for you right now.
Thank you.
79 towns covering over 16,500 children will be able to offer after school and summer meal programs to all children, whether they are preschool or school age, whether they are homeschooled or go to an independent school during the very vulnerable after school and summer times when we know that kids are hungry and families struggle.
If this
And
bill passes.
Yes, but you have to pass this bill
Yes.
in order to reap
That's
that reward.
huge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is
that is
huge.
We're talking about 6 million additional federal dollars for summer and after-school meals for children in our state
Right.
every year, if the bill passes. So I have the data, I have county sheets for each of you, and I will leave them with you.
That's incredible.
So-
Mr. Nichols, before you
Yeah.
leave, was the Principals Association in favor of this?
We're in favor of, we're in favor of the meal program. We're in favor especially of the CEP changes. The only thing we were testified against was we think the money should not come off the ed fund. But if it was going to come out of the ed fund, have it come off the top. So we did testify to that. And we also said, we really think it should come from the general fund. But we definitely support the program.
That's right.
I do have to run and pick up grandson number
We'll
one.
have you in next week. Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Have a safe trip.
Are there other questions?
Any other questions for Ms. Horton? That's really helpful, that gives us a little
great.
boost.
Great. I'll leave these to you.
Thank you. Doc, feel free to distribute them now, because I think they're
Okay.
individual, right? Anything else for Ms. Horton before we adjourn?
You each have your own county sheets.
Thank you.